My name is Margaret. I'm 58 years old, and my own daughter told me I was a failure over Sunday dinner. By morning, her car was gone, and her $42,000 college fund was frozen. It's a heck of a story, one that tore my world apart before I could piece it back together, stronger than before. I'm writing this from my little porch here in Ohio, watching the fireflies start their nightly dance. It's getting dark here. I'd love to know where you're all reading this from and what time it is in your part of the world. Let me know in the comments. It makes a lonely world feel a little more connected, knowing we're all under the same sky. The rich, comforting aroma of rosemary and garlic from the roast chicken usually wrapped my small house in a hug. It was the scent of Sundays, of family, of a steadfast love I tried to weave into the fabric of our lives. But that particular Sunday, the warmth felt fragile, like a thin veil threatening to tear. Across the polished oak of my dining table, my 19-year-old daughter, Emily, was a world away, her face illuminated by the cold blue light of her phone. The food on her plate, a meal I had spent the better part of the afternoon preparing, sat untouched, growing colder by the minute. This dinner was our ritual, a small island of normalcy I had clung to in the 5 years since my divorce from her father, Richard. For 90 minutes every week, we were supposed to be just us. But lately, it felt less like a sanctuary and more like a courtroom where I was perpetually on trial. "How was your week, honey?" I asked, my voice straining for a cheerfulness I didn't feel. "Did you make any progress on that big sociology paper?" Emily made a non-committal noise in the back of her throat, her thumb never ceasing its hypnotic scroll. "It's fine." "Just fine? I thought you were worried about the topic. If you need help with research, the library..." She finally looked up, and the look in her eyes was one of pure, unadulterated irritation. It was a look I was seeing more and more. "Oh my God, Mom, I'll handle it. It's not that deep." Her gaze immediately dropped back to her phone. A small, smug smile touched her lips. "Jessica just posted the new pictures from Cabo. You should see the diamond bracelet Dad got her for their anniversary. It's unreal." Jessica. The name was a stone in my gut. The woman who had been my husband's friend for years, who had suddenly become his soulmate the moment her own wealthy husband passed away. She was everything I wasn't. Sleek, tanned, and professionally leisured. My life had been 35 years of service as a head nurse, a career of controlled chaos, long hours, and the kind of bone-deep weariness that no vacation could cure. My hands were for healing and holding, not for displaying diamonds. Every penny of my modest salary, especially after the divorce, was carefully allocated. Her college fund, the mortgage, the car. "That sounds lovely for them," I managed, my voice tight. I focused on cutting my chicken into unnecessarily small pieces. "Speaking of the car, honey, that little orange light on your dashboard was on again. It's probably just time for an oil change. We should get that looked at this week." The car. A sensible silver Toyota Corolla, a graduation gift that I had researched for weeks to ensure it had the highest safety rating. I paid the insurance premiums, the maintenance bills, and the gas she used driving to and from her classes and her part-time job at a ridiculously expensive boutique. My name was on the title, a fact that seemed to be a minor inconvenience she preferred to ignore. The eye roll she gave me was a masterpiece of teenage contempt. It was slow, deliberate, and designed to communicate just how utterly boring and provincial she found me. Can you please not? Just for one meal, can we not talk about tedious things like oil changes? Jessica and Dad are talking about going to Greece next summer. That's what normal people talk about. The words slipped out before I could stop them, a low murmur of my own exhaustion. "Well, Jessica doesn't have to worry about your car insurance payments hitting her bank account." She heard it. Of course she heard it. Her head snapped up. the smug smile gone, replaced with a sneer that was shockingly ugly on her beautiful face. It was a look I'd seen before, but on her father. It was Richard's look of disdain. "You know what, Mom? That's your entire problem right there." I placed my fork and knife carefully on my plate, a sudden coldness seeping into my bones. "And what exactly is my problem, Emily?" "This," she spat, waving a hand dismissively at my cozy living room, at the framed photos of her growing up, at the very life I had painstakingly built for us from the ashes of my marriage. "This, all of this, your whole life is about saving and worrying and responsibilities. Dad and Jessica know how to live. They're fun. They're successful." That word, successful, it hung in the air between us, a judgment and a verdict. The implication was as sharp as a shard of glass. I, who had held down a demanding career while raising her single-handedly since she was 14. I, who had sacrificed my own retirement dreams of seeing the world to ensure she could have a debt-free education. I, who had built a life of stability and love for her, was not successful. I was the opposite. My throat closed up. "I have worked very hard to provide you a good life," I said, the words feeling weak and pathetic to my own ears. And that's when she stood up, leaned across the table, and delivered the killing blow. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was weighted with a cold, clear cruelty that was more devastating than any scream. She looked me right in the eye. "At least Dad's new wife, Jessica, isn't a failure like you." The world stopped. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic, it all faded into a deafening, ringing silence. A failure. The word echoed in the space she had just blown open inside my chest. It wasn't just an insult. It was an assassination of my entire identity as a woman, as a professional, as a mother. I didn't react. Some deep, primal survival instinct took over. The head nurse who could handle a code blue without flinching took control of my trembling hands. I stood up and began to clear the plates, my movements precise and mechanical. Her face, flushed with the thrill of her own cruelty, now looked confused. She had expected tears, shouting, a dramatic scene. I was denying her the satisfaction. "Well," she demanded, her voice petulant, "aren't you going to say anything?" I paused at the entrance to the kitchen, my back to her. I didn't turn around. "There's nothing left to say," I said, my voice hollow. "You should probably go." She huffed, grabbing her designer purse from the floor. "Fine, whatever. I'm going to a party anyway."
The front door slammed, rattling the pictures on the wall. I stood motionless in my kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of my love, a half-eaten meal I could no longer stomach. The numbness was a mercy, a temporary shield, but I knew what lay beneath it. And I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that the woman who had cooked this meal was gone forever. In her place, someone else was stirring, and she was cold, clear-eyed, and done being a failure. Sleep was an impossibility. I wandered through the silent house, each room a museum of my own foolish sacrifices. I sat in the worn armchair in the living room, the fabric faded from years of sunlight and bedtime stories, and let the memories come. They weren't gentle waves of nostalgia. They were brutal, punishing tides dragging me under. I saw myself, younger and perpetually exhausted, standing under the buzzing fluorescent lights of the hospital nurses' station at midnight. I was poring over paperwork, my eyes gritty with lack of sleep. I'd taken on the role of overseeing the hospital's conversion to a new digital record system, a thankless, high-stress project that came with a modest promotion and a significant salary increase. I'd done it for the money. Not for a new car or a vacation, but for the account I just opened, the Emily Peterson College Fund. I remembered the feeling of making that first deposit, a sense of pride so fierce it almost made the endless nights of work feel worth it. Then a sharper, more painful memory surfaced. I found myself mentally back in a dusty, dimly lit pawn shop downtown. The air smelled of old paper and desperation. I remembered the weight of my mother's gold locket in my palm, the delicate engraving of her initials worn smooth by time. It was the only significant piece of her jewelry I had kept after her funeral. But Emily was 16, and she had been cast as the lead in the high school musical. The drama club fees, the costume acquirements, the private coaching sessions, it all added up. Richard, who was contractually obligated to pay child support but nothing more, had just laughed when I asked for help. "It's a school play, Margaret, not Broadway," he'd said. "Don't be so dramatic." So I stood before a man with dead eyes and a practiced indifference, and I slid my mother's legacy across the counter. He barely glanced at it before naming a price that was a fraction of its worth. I took the cash without arguing. That night, when I told Emily she could do the musical, her shriek of joy had seemed to justify the hollow space on my neck where the locket used to be. I told myself a mother's love meant sacrifice. I had failed to understand that sacrifice, without appreciation, is just self-destruction. The house was a gallery of these invisible transactions. The guest bedroom, with its aging wallpaper, was supposed to be my home office, my space to finally write the novel I dreamed of in my youth. Instead, it became Emily's oversized closet for all the clothes she bought with the allowance I couldn't really afford. The cracked driveway I kept meaning to have repaved, the vacation fund that never grew, the retirement I kept pushing further and further away, all were casualties of my single-minded devotion. Sometime in the dark hours before dawn, as the first birds began their tentative chirps, the grief finally receded, leaving behind a cold, hard bedrock of anger. And beneath that anger was the most painful realization of all: my own complicity. I had done this. I had taught her that my love was a bottomless well from which she could draw without ever having to worry about the source. I had taught her that my boundaries were suggestions, not requirements. In my desperate fear of being the uncool parent, in my guilt over the divorce, I had failed at the most fundamental job of motherhood: to raise a grateful and resilient human being. I hadn't just been a mother, I had been an enabler. Her cruelty was the harvest of the seeds I had planted. That thought was a splash of icy water. It washed away the last of my tears and left me with a chilling clarity. This wasn't just about a hurtful comment. This was about correcting the entire course of her life, and mine. The lessons she had failed to learn under my loving care would now be taught by a harsher, more effective teacher: reality. The sun began to bleed across the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gray and pink. A new day. I stood up from the armchair, my back stiff, but my mind sharp. I was no longer a victim wallowing in her pain. I was a strategist planning a campaign. I made a pot of coffee, the aroma now smelling of resolve, not comfort. Then I made my first call. Not to Emily, not to Richard, but to Carol, my best friend of 30 years. She was a retired history teacher, a woman who understood tactics and consequences. "You're up with the birds," she said, her voice warm but alert. "The birds and I have a lot to discuss," I replied, my own voice devoid of its usual warmth. It was flat, calm, and purposeful. I told her everything, leaving out none of the painful details. I didn't cry. I reported the events with the clinical detachment of a nurse reading a patient's chart. When I finished, Carol was silent for a long moment. I had expected a rush of sympathy, a chorus of "that horrible child." Instead, she said something far more powerful. "Good," she said. "It's about time you got angry, Maggie. That righteous anger is the best tool you have right now. So, what's the plan?" The fact that she assumed I had a plan, that she saw me as a commander and not a casualty, was the greatest gift she could have given me. "I have a plan," I confirmed, "but I need intelligence first. Your brother-in-law, the one in commercial real estate, he knows everyone. I need you to find out the real story on Richard's financial situation. Not the country club version, the down and dirty, behind his payments version. I could almost hear the grin in her voice. Consider it done. Operation Financial Takedown is a go. What's your next move, General? My next move, I said, looking at the two names on the notepad next to my phone, is to dismantle the supply lines. The first call was to a 24-hour towing service. A man named Dave answered, his voice thick with the gravelly tones of someone who had been awake all night. I explained what I needed with cool efficiency. I need a vehicle removed from my property. It's a 2018 silver Toyota Corolla. The vehicle is registered solely in my name, Margaret Ann Peterson. I have the title and registration here. Yes, ma'am, he said, all business. And the destination? Your most secure impound lot, I specified. I want it stored indefinitely, and I will be the only person authorized to access or retrieve the vehicle. I'll be down later this morning to sign the paperwork and pay for the first month's storage in cash. I want no paper trail leading back to my bank accounts. Understood. We can have a truck there in 30 minutes. Thank you, Dave, I said. I appreciate your discretion. He grunted in acknowledgement and hung up. One piece of the puzzle was in motion.
Next, my laptop. My fingers flew across the keyboard, navigating to the familiar portal of my bank. There it was, the account I had so proudly named years ago, Emily Peterson College Fund. The balance stood at $42,315.62. For a moment, I saw it not as a number, but as a living history of my life's work. I saw the night shifts that had paid for it, the promotions I'd fought for, the frugal lunches I'd packed. It was my legacy to her, a tangible manifestation of my love. My jaw tightened. That love had been rejected and spat back in my face. This fund wasn't a gift anymore. It was leverage. With a series of swift, decisive clicks, I executed the transfer. The entire sum was moved into a new, high-yield savings account under my name alone. I set up new security protocols, making it inaccessible without a multi-step verification process. Then, I initiated the closure of the now empty college fund account. A small pop-up window asked, "Are you sure you want to permanently close this account?" I clicked yes without a moment's hesitation. The monument was gone. A wave of adrenaline and nausea washed over me. It felt like jumping off a cliff. There was no climbing back up. Just as the confirmation email from the bank arrived, the low, grinding rumble of the tow truck announced its arrival. I stood back from my living room window, watching as Dave, a broad-shouldered man whose weary expression suggested he'd seen every kind of human drama, expertly maneuvered his truck. He hooked up the Corolla with practiced ease that was almost balletic. Before clamming back into his cab, he glanced at my house and our eyes met through the window. He gave me a slow, single nod. It wasn't pitying, it was a nod of respect, a silent acknowledgement from one working person to another. It was strangely fortifying. As the truck rumbled down the street, Emily's car trailing behind it like a captured prize, a profound sense of finality settled over me. This was real. This was happening. The storm broke just after 10 a.m. My phone buzzed violently, the screen flashing with Emily's face. "Mom, my car is gone!" The words were a shriek of pure panic. "Someone stole my car! I'm going to be late! I called the police!" I took a sip of my now cold coffee. "Emily, calm down. No one stole it. And I suggest you call the police back and tell them it was a false alarm." "What are you talking about? It's gone." "Yes, it is," I said, my voice as smooth and cool as a river stone. "I had it towed." The silence on the other end was so absolute, I thought the call had dropped. I could picture her there, her mind struggling to process the information. You did what?" she finally stammered. "Why? That's my car." "Let's be precise," I corrected her. "It was the car you drove. It is and has always been my car. My name is on the title, I pay the bills, and I decided its services were no longer required. But I need it. I have a life, my job, my classes. How am I supposed to function?" "That sounds like a significant logistical problem," I said with clinical detachment. "I'm sure a bright college student like you is more than capable of finding a solution." "This is insane. You're being a psycho," she screamed. "When you're ready to speak to me without screeching, we can talk." And I ended the call. The follow-up was almost immediate. Richard. His voice was a low, menacing growl, the one he used to use when he wanted to bully me into submission during our divorce proceedings. Margaret, what in God's name do you think you're playing at? Emily is beside herself. You're terrorizing your own daughter. Call off this ridiculous stunt and have her car returned immediately. Hello, Richard, I said, my voice serene. Thank you for your input. It has been noted. Noted? This isn't a board meeting, and Emily is babbling something about her college fund being empty. You touch 1 cent of that money, Margaret, and I'll have my lawyer on you so fast your head will spin. I have rights. The old Margaret would have trembled, but the new Margaret was armed and ready. Richard, I said, and the sudden ice in my voice made him pause. Let me educate you. First, your rights to my personal financial assets ended the day our divorce was finalized, a fact your own lawyer should have made clear to you. Second, I had a very illuminating phone call this morning. I let that hang in the air. I found out some fascinating things about the number of creditors knocking on your company's doors. It sounds like you're having some cash flow problems. It must be very stressful trying to maintain the illusion of success. The silence from his end was pure gold. I had hit him where he lived, not in his heart, but in his ego. So, don't you ever call me again and lecture me on how to manage my money or my daughter, I continued, my voice low and sharp. Emily seems to think I'm a failure. Well, failures don't buy cars, and they certainly don't build 6-figure education funds. She made her choice. She chose the successful parent. So, if she needs a ride to school, I suggest you tell her to ask Jessica to chauffeur her in the new Mercedes. I disconnected the call before he could sputter a response. My entire body was humming with a strange, fierce energy. The scared, heartbroken woman from the night before was gone. In her place was a lioness who had just remembered she had claws, and she was ready to use them. Less than an hour later, my front door sounded like it was under siege. The pounding was frantic and furious, echoing through the quiet house. It was the sound of a person who had never in their life been denied entry to a place they considered their own. I knew it was Emily. I took a moment, standing in my hallway, to center myself. I smoothed the front of my blouse, took a slow, deep breath, and walked to the door. I would not meet her hysteria with my own. I would meet it with a wall of impenetrable calm. When I opened the door, she was a storm in human form. Her face was blotchy and swollen, her hair was a mess, and her eyes were shooting sparks of pure rage. "Give me my car keys right now," she yelled, trying to shoulder her way past me. I held my ground, placing a firm hand on the doorframe. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. "No," I said. The single word was as solid and unmoving as a granite boulder. "You have no right. You are ruining my life. Everything is ruined because of you," she screamed, her voice escalating with every word. I saw Mrs. Gable from 2 doors down peek out from behind her curtains. "So, we were having a public performance. Fine. We are not going to have this discussion on my front porch, Emily," I said, my voice low and even, forcing her to quiet down if she wanted to hear me. "You are not a child throwing a tantrum in a grocery store, and you are not welcome in my home until you can address me with a baseline of human respect." Her laugh was a harsh, ugly sound. "Respect? You want respect after what you've done? You're a thief. You stole my car. You stole my future." "Let's be very clear about the facts," I said, taking a small step forward onto the porch, invading her space and subtly forcing her to retreat a step. My voice was cold and precise, like a surgeon's scalpel. Fact 1. I did not steal anything. I repossessed an asset that is legally mine. You can check the title. Fact 2. I did not steal your future. I secured the money that I earned through 35 years of hard labor. That money was never a right. It was a privilege, a gift. And you don't get to spit on the gift giver and still expect to keep the gift. Her face crumpled, the anger momentarily replaced by a flicker of disbelief. She had never heard me speak this way. I had always been her soft place to land.
She was discovering I could also be the hard, unforgiving ground. "Dad is getting a lawyer," she threatened, her voice wobbling as she fell back on her father's bluster. "He's going to take you to court, and he's going to make you give it all back." The sheer emptiness of the threat was almost comical. Richard was terrified of lawyers in courtrooms right now. "I welcome him to try," I said with a thin, humorless smile. "A full financial disclosure in court would be very illuminating for his creditors. Now, if you're finished, I have a busy day." I started to turn back inside, the sight of the door beginning to close, of her access being definitively cut off, finally cracked through her rage and hit the raw nerve of panic beneath. "Mom, wait!" she cried, the word a desperate plea. "Please, just the car. I have a midterm exam tomorrow. It's worth 30% of my grade. I can't miss it. Please, just give me the car back for a few days. I'll do anything." There it was, the bargaining, the manipulation. My heart gave a painful lurch. Every maternal instinct I possessed screamed at me to fix this for her. The old Margaret would have sighed, lectured her for a minute, then tossed her the keys just to end the conflict and alleviate her child's distress. But I looked into her tear-filled eyes, and I saw no remorse. I saw only self-pity and a desperate need to solve her own immediate problem. She wasn't sorry for calling me a failure. She was sorry that her actions had resulted in an inconvenient consequence. And in that moment, I knew that giving in would be the most profound act of failure a mother could commit. It would teach her nothing, except that her mother's boundaries were made of sand. I looked her straight in the eye, my own heart feeling like a lead weight in my chest. This was going to hurt me far more than it hurt her, but it was necessary. "I am your mother, Emily, not your emergency service. And I am certainly not your doormat. You are a 19-year-old adult. Your midterm exam is your responsibility. Find a bus schedule, download a rideshare app, call one of your many friends. How you get to your exam is a problem for you to solve. This is what being an adult looks like." Her jaw dropped. She stared at me as if I had sprouted a second head. I didn't wait for a response. I stepped back inside and closed the door, turning the deadbolt with a decisive click. The sound echoed in the sudden silence of the house. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door, my knuckles white as I gripped the doorknob. My legs felt weak, and for a terrifying second, I thought I was going to be sick. Every fiber of my being wanted to undo what I had just done, to rush outside and hold my daughter and promise to make it all better. But I held my ground. I listened to her stand on the porch in stunned silence for a long moment, followed by a frustrated scream and the sound of her storming off down the walkway. The house was quiet, but it wasn't the silence of emptiness anymore. It was the silence of sovereignty. I had just defended the borders of my own self-respect. It was a brutal, ugly battle, and the casualties were my own peace of mind. But I knew, deep down, that I had just won the most important war of my life. For 2 days, there was a tense, ringing silence. No calls, no texts. I knew a new strategy was being formulated in Richard and Jessica's camp. My frontal assault on their expectations had clearly failed, so now they would resort to subterfuge. The call came on Wednesday afternoon. It was Jessica. "Margaret, dear, it's Jessica. I'm just calling because Richard and I are terribly worried. About you, mostly." I settled into my armchair, holding the phone away from my ear as if it were something toxic. "Is that so?" I replied, my voice a flat, uninviting monotone.
Well, yes. We all know you've been under a tremendous amount of stress since since your promotion at the hospital ended with your retirement. It's a big life change. And Emily, poor thing, is just caught in the middle. We think this lashing out, the car, the money, it's a cry for help. The audacity was breathtaking. She was trying to frame my calculated, strategic action as a menopausal, post-career breakdown. It was a classic move. Discredit the woman, and you discredit her argument. Jessica, let me assure you, I am perfectly sound of mind. My actions were not a cry for help. They were a statement of fact. She let out a little tinkling laugh, the kind that was meant to sound charming but only sounded like breaking glass. Oh, so defensive! Margaret, darling, we're on your side. We want what's best for Emily, which is why Richard and I thought it would be a wonderful idea if the three of us could go out for a lovely lunch. Just the adults. We can talk this through, find a compromise for Emily's sake. A compromise. I knew what their idea of a compromise was. I would give them everything they wanted, and in return, they would stop attacking me. The location she suggested was, of course, La Stella, the most ostentatiously expensive Italian restaurant in the city. It was a power play, designed to make me feel small and out of place in their world of casual luxury. The old me would have refused, made an excuse, avoided the confrontation. The new me saw the chessboard and recognized the opening they had just given me. "You know what, Jessica?" I said, injecting a note of weary resignation into my voice. "Maybe you're right. This has all been very unpleasant. A civilized lunch sounds like a good idea." Her stunned silence was my first small victory. She had expected a fight. My capitulation had thrown her off script. "Oh, well, wonderful," she sputtered. "Is Friday at 1 good for you?" "Friday at 1 is perfect. I'll see you then." After hanging up, I immediately called Carl. "The Vipers have invited me to lunch at La Stella."
Carol howled with laughter. "Are you going to wear your best suit of armor?" "Even better," I said. "I'm going to see my lawyer first." The next morning, I was sitting in the mahogany-paneled office of Mr. Henderson, the estate lawyer who had handled my parents' affairs and, later, my divorce. He was a small, precise man in his 70s, with eyes that missed nothing. I laid out the entire situation, from Emily's insult to Jessica's invitation. He listened without interruption, his fingertips steepled under his chin. When I finished, he didn't offer condolences. He offered something better: information. He pulled out a thick file labeled Peterson, Eleanor, Estate. "Margaret, your mother was not just a wonderful woman, she was a remarkably shrewd one," he began. He opened the file to a bookmarked page. When Richard's fiscal irresponsibility became apparent during the last few years of her life, she took steps. She insisted on restructuring her will to protect you and Emily. He slid a document across the polished desk. "The college fund is not, in a legal sense, your money. It is an asset of the Eleanor Peterson Educational Trust. It was part of your inheritance, yes, but specifically designated. You are named as the sole and uncontestable trustee. This gives you what we call absolute discretion." He explained the legalese in plain English. It meant the money was mine to control completely. I could disperse it, I could withhold it, I could invest it, as long as it was ostensibly for Emily's benefit. Richard had no paternal claim to it. Emily had no legal right to demand it. Any lawsuit they filed would be summarily dismissed. My mother, from beyond the grave, had handed me an iron shield. "She saw this coming, didn't she?" I whispered, a lump forming in my throat. "Your mother understood human nature," Mr. Henderson said gently. She wanted to provide for her granddaughter, but she would not allow her hard-earned legacy to be squandered by a fool. You are not just acting as a mother, Margaret. You are executing your legal duty as a trustee. You are on unshakable ground. He made me a certified copy of the two most important pages of the will. When I left his office, the documents were tucked safely in my purse. They felt heavier than paper. They felt like validation, like power, like the final word in an argument that hadn't even begun. On Friday, I dressed for battle. I wore a sharp charcoal gray pantsuit and a silk blouse the color of cream. I had my hair styled. When I walked into La Stella, I saw them at a corner table, already sipping wine. Jessica's eyes widened almost imperceptibly as she saw me. I was not the haggard, defeated woman she had expected to see. I walked toward them, my heels clicking purposefully on the marble floor. I was not a guest entering their world. I was a queen entering her court. "Richard, Jessica," I said, my voice cool and even as I took my seat. "Thank you for the invitation. I do hope you're hungry." The lunch at La Stella was a masterclass in psychological warfare. They tried to disarm me with compliments on my suit, then moved on to thinly veiled pity. "It must be so quiet for you, rattling around in that big house all alone," Jessica said, dabbing her lips with a linen napkin. "I find the peace and quiet to be one of the great luxuries of this stage of life," I replied with a serene smile, taking a sip of my iced tea. Richard took another tack. "Look, Margaret, we know this is about us. You're angry about the divorce and you're taking it out on Emily. It's not fair to the kid." "This has nothing to do with you, Richard," I said, my gaze steady. "This is about Emily and her behavior. Something you might know more about if you spent time with her doing something other than buying her things." The lunch ended in a stalemate. I refused to discuss the car or the money, and they left frustrated and angry, leaving me to enjoy a leisurely tiramisu, which I made sure to tell the waiter to put on their bill. While I was playing chess with the adults, Emily was learning that life was a much harder game without any pieces. Her world, once a comfortable bubble of classes, friends, and shopping, had violently imploded. The bus schedule became her new master, dictating her waking and sleeping hours. Her trendy boutique job was gone. Her friends, whose loyalty was apparently tied to her gas card and her ability to pay for concert tickets, had all but vanished. The real crisis hit when the university's bursar's office sent the final, non-negotiable email. "Dear Miss Peterson, this is to inform you that due to an outstanding tuition balance of $8,450, your enrollment for the current semester has been suspended effective immediately." She was out. She was no longer a college student. She was just a 19-year-old girl with no car, no job, and no prospects. I heard all of this not from her, but through Carol's intelligence network. The silence from Emily's end was absolute. I imagined her holed up at her father's house, being fed a steady diet of poison about how I was the villain, the source of all her problems. But Richard and Jessica's support had its limits. As Emily later told me, once it became clear I wasn't going to cave, their sympathy for her evaporated. Her presence became an inconvenience, a constant nagging reminder of their failure. They started making comments about her needing to contribute and not mope around the house all day. With nowhere else to go, she was forced to do the unthinkable. She looked for a job. Not a fun job selling overpriced clothes to her friends, but a real job. She found one at the Corner Booth, a 24-hour diner off the interstate, that always smelled of stale coffee and bacon grease. She was earning minimum wage. After her first full week of work, her paycheck, after taxes, was $287. It was that flimsy piece of paper that finally broke her. She called me on a Tuesday night, after her shift. I heard the clatter of pots and pans in the background. She was likely hiding in the diner's back office. Her voice was flat, hollowed out from all its former fire. "Mom? Emily? Are you okay?" I asked, my heart clenching. "I got paid today," she said, her voice cracking. She let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob.
$287 for 40 hours of hell. I did the math. To pay for one semester of tuition, I would have to work at this diner full-time for 30 weeks. Over half a year.
She wasn't screaming or demanding. She was just stating facts, the cold, hard arithmetic of the real world finally dawning on her. "I'm sorry," she whispered. And this time, the words sounded different. They weren't a tactic. They were a confession. "I get it now. I didn't get it before, but I do now." "What do you get, honey?" I asked gently. "Everything," she said, her voice thick with tears. "All those times you said no, all the times you worked late, I thought you were just being cheap, a failure. But you weren't failing. You were paying for everything, for me." This was it. This was the breakthrough. Not a forced apology under duress, but a moment of genuine, painful epiphany. "I can't do this, Mom," she sobbed, the desperation real and raw. "I can't. I don't know how. I messed everything up." My heart ached to fix it for her, but I knew the lesson wasn't over. She had to learn not just that she was wrong, but that she was capable of making it right. "Yes, you can, Emily," I said, my voice firm but full of a love I hoped she could hear. "It's hard, but you are strong. You are my daughter. You have everything inside you that you need to fix this. But you have to do it. The next step has to be yours." I didn't offer her money. I didn't offer her the car. I offered her something more important, my belief in her. It was all I had left to give. I hung up the phone, praying it would be enough. The phone call from the diner was a turning point, but it wasn't a magic wand. Emily was still trapped, emotionally and physically, under her father's roof. Richard and Jessica, sensing they were losing their grip, doubled down on their campaign of manipulation. They told her I was just playing games, that her epiphany was a sign of weakness, and that if she just held out, I would eventually break and give them what they wanted. The person who finally gave her the tools to escape was her cousin Susan. Susan, a pragmatic nursing student a few years older than Emily, had always been a quiet observer of our family's dynamics. Emily, feeling utterly lost, drove her father's car, a privilege he now lorded over her, to Susan's small off-campus apartment, desperate for an ally. She expected a shoulder to cry on. What she got was a dose of unvarnished truth. As Emily later recounted the entire conversation to me, Susan let her talk for nearly an hour, outlining her misery at the diner, her confusion, her fear. When she was finished, Susan didn't offer platitudes. She went to her laptop. "I'm going to show you something, Em, but you have to promise you'll be smart about it." She pulled up public records websites, county courthouse filings, business registration databases. Susan, with her meticulous nursing student brain, had been doing her own research ever since she'd become suspicious of Richard's sudden lavish lifestyle. "This is your dad's company," she said, pointing to the screen. "And this is a lien filed against it by a supplier for non-payment for $50,000. Here's another one, and another." She showed her the property records for their big new house. It was mortgaged to the hilt, with a second mortgage taken out just 6 months prior. She showed her the recent sale records for some of Richard's business assets, sold off, quietly, at a loss. "They're not successful, Emily. They're broke. They're putting on a show. A very expensive, very desperate show. And they were counting on your college fund as their next big infusion of cash." It was like a switch being flipped in a dark room. All the confusing pieces suddenly snapped into place for Emily. The constant pressure to get money from me, the extravagant gifts that didn't align with their supposed income. Their anger wasn't about her education, but about their own survival. Then Susan delivered the final, most personal blow. "I was at their house for that barbecue last month, remember? I went inside to use the bathroom, and I heard them talking in the master bedroom. They didn't know I was there."
Susan's face was filled with pity. Emily. Jessica was laughing, Em. She was talking about your mom's old car and her sad little nurse's salary. She said, and I quote, "We just need to squeeze that old cow dry. One last big check from the college fund and we can finally get clear of this mess." And your dad? He didn't defend your mom. He just told Jessica to be patient. Old cow. The words struck Emily with the force of a physical slap. The woman she had admired, the woman she had held up as a model of success, saw her mother as nothing more than livestock to be milked. And her father, her hero, had stood by and let it happen. The betrayal was so profound, so complete, that it eclipsed everything else. It wasn't about the car or the money anymore. It was about the realization that she had been a willing accomplice in a scheme to defraud and humiliate the one person in the world who had ever truly loved her. She drove back from Susan's apartment in a daze. She walked into her father's house, a house that now felt like a stage set for a cheap play, and saw them for what they were: two desperate, hollow people. That evening, my doorbell rang. It was a soft, hesitant ring, a sound that I hadn't heard in a long time. When I opened the door, Emily was standing there. She wasn't the raging storm from a few weeks ago, or a hollowed-out girl on the phone. She was just a young woman with a world of shame in her eyes. In her hands, she was holding a small potted orchid. "The tag said it's a symbol of respect and admiration," she said, as she held it out to me. "I bought it with my tip money." I took the plant from her. Her hands were cold. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside and let her pass. She walked into the living room and stood there looking at the photos on the mantel, the worn armchair, the evidence of a life she had so recently scorned. Finally, she turned to face me, her eyes swimming with tears she no longer tried to hide. "She called you old cow, and I defended her. I chose her. I told you are a failure. I am a fool." She took a shivering breath, the apology pouring out of her in a raw, unfiltered torrent of shame and regret. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I was so stupid and so cruel. You are not a failure. You are everything. You are the only thing in my whole life that has ever been real and true. I'm sorry I couldn't see it." The orchid in my hands felt impossibly heavy. It was more than a plant. It was a peace offering, a seed of a new beginning. "Thank you, Emily," I said, my own voice thick with emotion. But now comes the hard part: proving it.
Emily's apology was the key, but it didn't instantly unlock the door to our old life. We both knew that life was gone for good. We had to build something new. She moved back home that night, but the terms of her residency were starkly different. The probation was in effect. She kept her job at the diner, her paycheck was her own, and from it, she paid for her phone, her toiletries, and a small, symbolic $50 a week for groceries. The car keys remained in a drawer in my kitchen, and the college fund remained a topic we did not discuss. She did her chores, she was quiet, she was respectful. It was a fragile, tentative peace. Richard and Jessica, meanwhile, were apoplectic. Their pawn had deserted them. Their last financial hope had vanished. They called Emily's phone incessantly, alternating between threats and tearful pleas, but she refused to answer. Their direct line to my wallet had been severed. This forced them into a final, desperate, all-or-nothing gambit. The invitation came via a glossy, cream-colored card in the mail. "You're invited to a surprise 20th birthday celebration for our darling daughter, Emily," it read in an elegant script. It was to be held at the Oak Room, a private dining club known for its old money members and hushed, intimidating atmosphere. It was so transparently a trap, it was almost laughable. They were taking the battle to a public stage, a place where they felt powerful and I would feel exposed. They were going to leverage the social pressure of a family gathering to execute a public shaming. Emily saw the card on the kitchen counter and her face paled. "You can't go, Mom. It's an ambush. They're going to attack you."
I looked at the invitation, then at my daughter, who was finally, fiercely on my side. A warm sense of pride spread through my chest. "I know it's an ambush," I said, picking up the card, "but you can't win a war by hiding in your bunker. Sometimes you have to march onto the enemy's chosen battlefield and burn it to the ground." A small, hard smile touched my lips. "And I think it's about time we ended this war. Go pick out your prettiest dress. We're going to a party." The night of the party, we arrived as a united front. I wore my charcoal suit, my silent armor. Emily wore a simple blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes, and for the first time in a long time, she looked at peace. Tucked inside my purse, next to Emily's birthday card, was the slim file containing the certified copies of my mother's will. The moment we walked into the Oak Room, we were hit by a loud chorus of "Surprise!" Richard and Jessica stood there, orchestrating the scene, their faces radiating a triumphant benevolence that made my skin crawl. The room was filled with their people, Richard's nervous-licking business associates, Jessica's gossiping friends from the tennis club, and a smattering of relatives who had been roped into the drama. The first hour was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Jessica clung to my arm, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Margaret, dear, I'm so glad you could make it. We were all so worried you weren't feeling up to it." Richard, playing the role of the magnanimous patriarch, made a great show of ordering a bottle of champagne that cost more than my monthly car payment. "Nothing's too good for my girl," he announced with a pointed look in my direction. I just smiled serenely, accepted a glass of sparkling water, and observed. I was a nurse in an operating theater, watching the surgeons make their incisions, knowing my turn would come. The moment arrived, as I knew it would after the ridiculously ornate cake was cut. Richard stood, tapping his champagne flute with a knife. The room fell silent. "Friends, family," he began, his voice booming with false sincerity. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate our wonderful daughter, Emily." He beamed at her. "It's been a tough year with many challenges and misunderstandings, but family is about forgiveness. It's about looking to the future." He then turned his gaze slowly, deliberately, until it landed on me, the predator cornering its prey. "Emily has an incredible future ahead of her. A college education is not a luxury, it is a necessity, and we, as her family, have a moral obligation to support her. Jessica and I are prepared to do our part, and we are deeply hopeful that everyone will put aside their personal feelings and do what is right for this brilliant young woman's promotion into the next chapter of her life." The entire room turned to look at me. The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. I was the obstacle. I was the bitter, vindictive ex-wife, the failed mother who was single-handedly destroying my daughter's future. It was a perfectly executed public shaming. I saw Emily's hand tremble where it rested on the table. I reached over and gave it a reassuring squeeze. I let the silence stretch for a beat, letting their accusations sink in, letting the audience become complicit. Then I slowly rose to my feet. My heart was hammering, but my hands were steady. I picked up my simple glass of water. The show was over. My turn had come. "Richard, thank you," I began, my voice clear and calm, carrying easily through the hushed room. "That was a beautiful speech, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. Emily's future, a future built on a foundation of truth and integrity, is the most important thing in the world." I turned my body slightly, addressing not just Richard and Jessica, but the entire room. I have their undivided attention. Richard is right that there have been many misunderstandings lately. So I'd like to take this opportunity on this special occasion to clear a few of them up for everyone. Jessica's smile tightened at the corners. This was not going according to her script. "The first misunderstanding," I said, my voice dropping slightly, drawing them in, "is the notion that this family's recent turmoil was caused by some kind of emotional instability on my part. The turmoil was not caused by a menopausal whim. It was caused by a calculated campaign of greed, manipulation, and profound disrespect." A collective soft gasp rippled through Jessica's side of the room. Richard's face began to flush a dangerous shade of red. The second misunderstanding, I said, my voice still cutting through the audience, is the narrative that I have been punishing my daughter. I have not been punishing her. I have been parenting her. I have been teaching her a lesson that she, unfortunately, was not learning, that actions have consequences, and that love and support are a two-way street, not a one-way entitlement. Margaret, this is neither the time nor the place, Richard started to say, rising from his chair. Please sit down, Richard, I said, my voice cutting through his like steel. You created this time and this place. You invited these guests. The least you can do is allow me to finish. He hesitated, then sank back into his chair, stunned into silence by my sheer audacity. But the biggest misunderstanding of all, I said, my voice now ringing with a power they had never heard from me before, is about the college fund itself.
I reached into my purse and retrieved the file folder. I opened it and took out the 2 certified pages. This isn't just a bank account. This is a legacy. I held up the papers. This is a copy of the last will and testament of my mother, Eleanor Peterson. The mention of my mother, a woman universally respected in our family for her quiet strength and sharp mind, sent a new wave of whispers through the room. My mother, Emily's grandmother, was a very wise woman. She saw the world with clear eyes, and she took specific legal steps to protect her legacy and her family. I walked slowly around the table until I stood beside my cousin, Martha, a retired paralegal known for her sharp mind and no-nonsense demeanor. Martha, as someone who understands the language of these things, would you do me the honor of reading the highlighted section aloud for everyone? Martha, looking intensely curious, took the documents. The room was so quiet you could hear the clinking of ice in the water glasses. She put on her reading glasses and began to read, her voice clear and precise. I hereby bequeath the sum of $42,000 to be placed in a discretionary trust for the benefit of my granddaughter, Emily Peterson's post-secondary education. The administration of this trust, including any and all disbursements, is to be at the sole and absolute discretion of the appointed trustee, my daughter, Margaret Ann Peterson. The trustee's decisions regarding the administration of these funds are final and are not subject to legal challenge by any other party. Martha looked up from the page, her eyes wide. She looked at me, then at Richard, and a slow look of complete understanding dawned on her face. She knew exactly what this meant. I took the papers back from her. My mother established a trust, I explained to the silent room, and she appointed me as its sole guardian. It is not my money to give away foolishly, and it is not Emily's money to demand. It is my mother's legacy entrusted to my care. It is my legal and moral duty to protect that legacy from irresponsibility, from entitlement, and especially, my eyes locked onto Richard and Jessica, from predators. The word hung in the air, an unexploded bomb. Their faces had crumpled. The masks of smug superiority had shattered, revealing the raw panic and humiliation beneath. They were exposed, not just as liars, but as fools who had been outmaneuvered by the very woman they had so profoundly underestimated. I turned back to my daughter, my expression softening. Happy birthday, Emily. I am prouder than I can say of the woman you are fighting to become, a woman your grandmother would have admired. I love you. For a moment, there was absolute silence. Then my cousin Martha started to clap, a slow, deliberate, and deeply respectful applause. Her husband joined in, then an aunt, then a few of Emily's friends. It wasn't a standing ovation, but it was something far more powerful. It was a verdict. The ambush had failed. The war was over, and the failure had just won. The party disintegrated quickly after that. Richard and Jessica, their faces pale masks of fury and shame, muttered excuses about an early morning and practically fled their own event. They had thrown a lavish party to publicly execute me and had instead committed social suicide.
The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for them. Word of their public unmasking, coupled with Richard's already precarious financial state, created a perfect storm. His remaining credit lines were pulled, his business partners deserted him, and within 6 months, the bankruptcy that Carol had predicted came to pass. The big house, the Mercedes, the diamond bracelets, all were sold off to appease a legion of angry creditors. I felt no joy in their ruin, only a quiet, weary sense of order being restored to the universe. But my story isn't about their ending, it's about our new beginning. The ride home from the party was quiet. Emily sat beside me, staring out the window, her reflection a ghostly image against the passing city lights. When we pulled into our driveway, she turned to me. "Grandma really did that?" she asked, her voice filled with awe. She really did," I confirmed. She always said, "The best defense is a well-drafted legal document." Emily smiled, a real, genuine smile. "She was a badass." "Yes, she was. And so are you." That night was the end of the war, but the beginning of the long, hard work of peace. Trust, once shattered, is not glued back together overnight. It has to be regrown, slowly and patiently. She understood this. She didn't ask for the car back. She didn't ask about the college fund. She went back to her shifts at the diner. She continued to pay her grocery money. She was earning her way back, not with money, but with consistency and humility. We established a new routine. On her days off, we would tackle a project together. We repainted the guest bedroom, her old, oversized closet, turning it into the bright, airy writing space I had always dreamed of. As we rolled pale yellow paint onto the walls, we talked, really talked. She told me about the customers at the diner, the kindness of strangers, the crushing weight of exhaustion. I told her about my early years as a nurse, the challenges I had faced, the dreams I had put on hold. We were no longer just mother and daughter, we were becoming friends, two women sharing their stories. One Saturday, about 6 months after the party, she came to me with a folder, just as I had envisioned. It was filled with spreadsheets and application forms. She had a plan. She had been taking one class at a time at the local community college, paying for it herself with her wages. Now she was ready to enroll full-time. She showed me her budget, every penny accounted for. She showed me her grades from the 2 classes she had taken, 2 A's. "I am not asking for a handout," she said, her voice steady and proud. "I would like to formally apply to the Eleanor Peterson Education Trust for a grant to cover my tuition. I've included my academic record and a personal essay on why I believe I am a worthy recipient of her legacy." I read her essay. It was about second chances, about the value of hard work, and about the quiet strength of the women in her family. My eyes filled with tears. "Your application has been approved," I said, my voice thick with emotion. That afternoon, I drove to the impound lot and paid the fees. When I pulled the silver Toyota into our driveway, Emily was waiting on the porch. The look on her face, a mixture of disbelief, joy, and profound gratitude, was worth more than all the money in the world. "I'll pay you back for all of it, Mom," she vowed as I handed her the keys. "Every penny. I just live a life that would make your grandmother proud. That's all the payment I will ever need." And she has. She finished her 2 years at community college with a perfect GPA and transferred to the state university. She kept working, contributing, and studying. She graduated with honors, holding a degree in social work. She works now at a center for at-risk youth, helping kids who, like her, made terrible mistakes and are just looking for a second chance. Which brings us to tonight. I'm still sitting on my porch, but I'm not alone anymore. The silver Toyota is in the driveway, and the smell of rosemary and garlic is wafting from my kitchen. Inside, Emily is laughing as she pulls a roast chicken out of the oven. It's Sunday, and for the first time in a long time, Sunday dinner feels like a celebration. She has become a woman of substance, of compassion, of strength, a woman who is anything but a failure. The painful journey we took taught us both a hard lesson. It taught her the cost of ingratitude, and it taught me the price of my own silence. I had to lose my daughter for a little while to finally find her for good. And in the process, I found myself too, a woman who is not just a mother, but a guardian of a legacy, a fighter, and the proud, successful architect of her own quiet, happy life.